Chapter 15. There was an unfamiliar tug in Antonio's belly, wet and sharp. He shifted his position, groggily, trying to relieve the pain, but it only hurt more as he transferred the weight of his abdomen. The crisp sting brought him to his senses. He lay in the wrecked mass car, the cell now upside down. Most of the panelling hung limp and shredded. Shattered glass littered the interior, and sparks fizzed from the exposed and torn electrics. Antonio looked down at his stomach to see what shape he was in. A shard of hard plastic had embedded itself in his midriff. The pain took his breath away, but it didn't look deep. He let his head drop back again, and once the dizziness slowed, he probed the rest of his body, testing movement in his limbs one at a time. His left knee ached, right shoulder was stiff and numb, and he suspected some cracks in the ribs along his right flank. He was okay, more or less. The empty cell had helped. The furnished cabin would have been lethal. A gust of air drifted over Antonio, and he looked behind to find the door busted open, the dull tarmac of the road outside glittering with fragments of glass. Shapes of other cars not far away. Noises filtered through the ringing in his skull. He didn't have long. The emergency services would arrive soon. Perhaps they were here already. And if they found him, then so would corporate security. Holding his wound, Antonio started crawling out. He flinched and shielded his eyes as a bright plume of sparks flashed beside him. A long panel lay open, its dense collection of circuitries hung in haphazard tendrils. A small flicker of orange shone amongst the tatter of metal. Antonio remembered the fire in the mass car next to him and the wretched screams of his neighbour. He crawled on as the flames grew. Something familiar caught his attention, tucked in behind a tangle of cables. Looked like the housing to an echo processor. Somewhere in his head, a technical voice wondered why that was important. The answer soon came to him. Usually, the echo processor was housed next to the nav mobility receiver, which maintained and encoded the network between the mass car and whatever utility broadcaster Dismamona used. Antonio stopped crawling. If it was still intact, then he might be able to ghost the receiver and fool the utility broadcaster, at least for a little while. At least long enough to tap some intel. With gritted teeth, he dug into the electronics, tugging away the thick coils of data lines. He found what he was looking for. The nav mobility receiver, a blue sliver of circuitry that he snapped from its station and stuffed into his shirt. With the heat of the flames on his feet, Antonio shuffled himself out of the mass car as fast as the pain would let him. Outside in the tunnel, mass cars were strewn over the highway in disorderly heaps. He sloshed amongst them, confused and nauseous. A medley of strange noises all around. The hissing leak of pressurized gas. Atonal complaints of motors. Muffled and hysterical sobbing. Breathless and wet. And over it all, the wail of sirens echoed down the tunnel, reverberating off the tubular walls, gaining in volume and proximity. The flow of traffic must have been halted somewhere behind his position, where the sirens were coming from. Antonio staggered off in the opposite direction, his fingers clasping the plastic splinter in his stomach, trying to staunch the bleeding while holding the bastard thing still. An unsteady pile of cars and auto-lorry wagons blocked the way ahead. With some difficulty, Antonio clambered over one of the outer vehicles and found himself looking down an open, empty tunnel. he'd reached the end of the crash site. Anyone forward of this point had escaped the catastrophe and was long gone. From out of the darkness, a bright light shone in his eyes, and a voice called to him. "Hey, you! Good God! Are you all right?" Fast footsteps clapped towards him on the tarmac, hands on his shoulders, an arm supporting. "Bloody hell! You okay? Shit! Let's get you sat down. Car's over here. Can you make it? I'll hold you. Don't worry. I'll hold you. Bloody hell. You a medic?" "Nah, mate. They're at the other end. I'm highways maintenance. Just arrived. I was working on a junction nearby. Heard what happened and pegged it up here. Bloody nightmare. Here we are. Steady. I've got you." They tumbled awkwardly into the man's mass car, full of tools and survey equipment. "That's it. Sit yourself down. Car? Nearest hospital. Emergency transit. Let's go." The man looked down at Antonio's wound. "Bloody hell. Have you got anything for the pain?" Dunno. Should be a standard met kit. Car? What have we got?" "Oxycodone." Antonio looked down at his belly in shock. "Well, this is fucking awful, isn't it? Please help me." "Yeah, car? Have we got something to help him sleep?" "I'm authorised to dispense a methohexital hyperspray in emergencies." "Do it. This is an emergency." The engineer looked at Antonio and tried his best to reassure him. "Look, don't worry. You'll be asleep in a moment, and the ETA for the hospital is 3.5 minutes. A panel opened in the wall, and the maintenance engineer took the hyperspray that lay inside. Before he turned, Antonio sprang forward and twisted the engineer's wrist in a sudden, forceful movement. Bewildered by the assault, there was no time to resist. Antonio injected the engineer's thigh with the hyperspray, and he dropped to the floor, unconscious. "Car?" Antonio said, wincing at the pain his sudden movement had provoked. "Change of destination.